good evening, and welcome to a spooky episode of Codo Cinema, the podcast show where I talk about movies. I bid you welcome as your host, Mark Codo, aka Codoman. Well, it's finally here. We are here for another year of Codo Cinema Horror Month. And I am super excited about this year because I got some movies that I really want to talk about for the month of October. That is right, folks. So I got one in hand right now to talk about. Now, this movie that I'm going to talk about, while it is a superhero movie, but it does have horror and gothic elements to it. And to those who are listening, it's going to be a bit of a surprise, but this movie that I'm going to talk about will be the 1994 movie titled The Crow. To give some background, The Crow is a 1994 American superhero film directed by Alex Proyas and written by David J. Shaw and John Shirley, based on the 1989 comic book series of the same name by James O'Barr. It stars Brandon Lee as Eric Draven, aka The Crow, a rock musician who is resurrected from the dead to seek vengeance against the gang who murdered him and his fiancée. The film is distributed by Dimension Films and Miramax Films, with production companies Entertainment Media, Investment Corporation, Pressman Film, and Jeff Most Productions. Now, aside from Brandon Lee, other cast members includes Ernie Hudson, Michael Wincott, Bai Ling, Sophia Shanaz, Anna Levine, Michael Massey, Tony Todd, and Rochelle Davis, just to name a few. Now, of course, being with the film, for those of you who are probably wondering about this movie, now for those who are listening to this episode will obviously recognize this movie. And to those who don't recognize the movie, that's okay. I'm just going to give you the background right now of this movie. So, to those who are very familiar with this movie, The Crow, while not only a superhero movie, but a lot of people will recognize this movie most notably for the tragic death of actor Brandon Lee. Now, as for Brandon Lee is an American actor and, of course, the son of legendary martial arts actor. Brandon Lee was born in 1965, and one of his early movies was obviously The Crow. While not his first movie, Brandon Lee starred in other movies such as Legacy of Rage, Laser Mission, Showdown Little Tokyo, and Rapid Fire, and The Crow being one of his last movies before his death. Now, I will talk about that. I will talk about that soon. Obviously enough, I'm just talking about the overall background of this movie, plus my brief background on this movie. The Crow premiered in Santa Monica on May 10th, 1994, before it was released on May 13th, 1994 in the United States. So basically being released in 1994, it is celebrating its 30th anniversary. And as I mentioned, the film came out in 1994. It was on a budget of $23 million and it grossed $94 million. The film received positive reviews for its style and Brandon Lee's performance. And of course, in the following years, the film has gained a cult following, with the success of the film led to media franchise that includes sequels such as The Crow City of Angels, The Crow Salvation, and The Crow Wicked Prayer. Those sequels, which mostly featured different characters and none of the original cast members, were unable to match the success of the first film. Plus, there was also a reboot movie of The Crow, which stars Bill Skarsgård as the title character, was released this year. Now, with that reboot, I heard that reboot was in development hell for a while, but it wasn't until other filmmakers and actors, which also included Luke Evans, Bradley Cooper, and Jason Momoa, were all casted as Eric Draven, the Crow, during various points in development, until Bill Skarsgård took the role in April of 2022, with Rupert Sanders directing the reboot. Now, for what I heard about this movie, I heard this reboot did not do as well. Like, it received negative reviews from critics and became a box office bomb. Like, the film's budget for the reboot of The Crow had a budget of $50 million, and it barely made half of that. It made $22.1 million. It barely made half, so it didn't earn its money back. Obviously, the feeling of that movie is the fact that why do a reboot of The Crow, knowing the fact that the original Crow was not only successful, but also knowing the fact that because of the Brandon Lee's death, it's untouchable. Like, I feel like the 1994 film is untouchable. Yet there were sequels and a reboot that came out, to which I don't understand why. But let's be honest, it's Hollywood. They're obviously gonna like reboot a lot of things. Not to name a few companies, Disney live action remakes. To give a quick background on my end about this movie, I'm not familiar with the Crow. Aside from Brandon Lee playing the title role, I'm not very familiar with it. Sure, yes, there is a comic book that came out, as I mentioned, that James O'Barr wrote. Like, that's the only thing that I know of. However, I started to hear more about The Crow, and how did I hear about this? Well, I watched a few Watch Mojo videos, mostly top 10s, and one of the top 10s shows The Crow, and it featured Brandon Lee, and they were mostly talking about the Brandon Lee's death. One video included how the movie incorporated visual effects for certain scenes that Brandon Lee did not film. They used a stand-in to fill in for some of Brandon Lee's scenes that were not filmed. And to those who are wondering who the stand-in was, it was Chad Stahelski. Chad Stahelski was Brandon Lee's stand-in or stunt double, and of course they incorporated visual effects on Chad Stahelski to post a digital face of Brandon Lee onto Chad Stahelski's face, and to this day, it's hard to tell which scenes featured Brandon Lee and which scenes featured Chad Stahelski, Brandon Lee's stunt double. And there is a scene that I will talk about very soon that I found where they actually incorporated the visual effects, and I will get to that pretty soon. That's where I started to learn more about the existence of this movie. Now, of course, I tried to watch this. Now, I tried to find this movie online, and I looked everywhere. I searched high, I searched low, and until then, the original movie, popped up on Amazon streaming, and I started to watch it because of what happened on set and how it impacted the movie so much to the point where it's literally tragic. Like, it's literally tragic. Like, when you watch this movie, The Crow, you feel Brandon Lee's presence in this movie, in the 1994 Crow movie. It's a lot to say. Now, I'm going to break down this movie right now. So let's get to it. So the movie opens up on October 30th in Detroit, and of course on October 30th in Detroit is called Devil's Night, and it features Sergeant Albrecht, who is being played by Ernie Hudson, who is at the scene of a crime where Shelley Webster, being played by Sophia Shinaz, has been beaten, sexually assaulted, while her fiance and local musician and guitarist Eric Draven, being played by Brandon Lee, had been murdered, and of course being stabbed, shot, and thrown out of the apartment window to the streets below. The couple had been planning their wedding for the next day, which was on Halloween, and of course, during that scene, a cop comments darkly, "Who gets married on Halloween?" While Albrecht responds, "Nobody." Now, this scene opens up it is very spooky, eerie, and gothic too. Like the gothic setting for The Crow, like it is very good. Like the way how it's set up, like it introduces the movie very well, and it sets up on what we're going to see throughout the rest of the movie. Like this is not your typical superhero movie, like like Superman, the Avengers, Iron Man, that type of stuff. Even Aquaman, But this is like, I want to say this is kind of similar to Batman a little bit, because Batman takes place in Gotham City, which also has that eerie gothic feel to it. But for The Crow, it's similar, but the only difference is obviously it takes place on Halloween. It also rains too. It literally rains in the opening of this movie. We even get an opening narration for this movie, and I quote: "People once believed that when someone dies, a crow carries their soul to the land of the dead. But sometimes something so bad happens that a terrible sadness is carried with it, and the soul can't rest. Then sometimes, just sometimes, the crow can bring that soul back to put the wrong things right." And this is how that movie opens. We get this movie. The movie opens up in that setting, but also we get this quote. Now, this quote, the narration is being narrated by this little girl. This little girl is Sarah, who's being played by Rochelle Davis, and she's narrating the opening of this movie. And here's a fact about this one. This one was written on the spot prior to Brandon Lee's death. Like, this was not part of the original script. This was actually written prior to the death of Brandon Lee. Just to throw this out there. It is a very good opening narration. So, going back to the movie, as Albrecht prepares to leave for the hospital with Shelley, he meets a young girl named Sarah. As I mentioned, Sarah's the one who narrates the opening, and Sarah is, riding the skateboard, and she tells the cop that she is a friend of Eric and Shelley, and that they took care of her. Albrecht tells her that Shelley probably won't survive. And this is true because Shelley gets killed off in the beginning, and this is true because Shelley dies in the opening of this movie. And it's very sad too, because the death of Shelley, it motivates the mission for Eric Draven. So 1 year later, a crow flies over the dark and rainy landscape of Detroit and lands on the headstone of Eric Draven. It taps at the stone with its beak, awakening Eric from the grave. He climbs out of the ground, trembling and racked with convulsions. With some confusion, he stands and walks with the crow to his abandoned apartment, finding it in shambles. Memories of the night of his death come back to him as the gang responsible runs through the city, setting fire to it. The faces of the attackers stick in his mind, and overcome with grief, he grabs the frame of a broken window and the glass cutting deep into his palms. To his astonishment, the blood from the wounds flows back into his skin, and the wounds heal themselves. So basically, the crow has healing powers, basically like to regenerate. You know what I'm saying? Bent on vengeance, he changes his clothes and paints his face white in parody of a porcelain Harley Quinn mask he had given Shelley as a gift. He then draws black liner around his eyes and down his cheeks like tears, and paints his lips black with Glasgow lines reaching out from the corners. Guided by the crow and sharing the crow's high perspective on the city, Eric sets out to avenge his and Shelley's murders. Now, this opening scene right here, where we see Eric Draven coming back to his abandoned apartment and transforms into the crow. In my opinion, this is the best scene in this movie. And I'm going to tell you what, this is the best scene. This is the best scene in this movie because knowing the fact of what went down with Brandon Lee it gave good use to visual effects in this very scene. And this is the only scene that I can find where Brandon Lee's stunt double Chad Stahelski was used. So the way how this scene was put together, it was amazing. I watched, I looked up, I watched the behind the scenes footage of how they incorporated the visual effects and whatever footage they could find to create this scene. So what they did was during one scene where Brandon Lee as Eric Draven was walking into the abandoned apartment, shivering and trembling from the rain, that was actually photoshopped in from an earlier shot where he was shivering and trembling out in the alleyway, and they photoshopped his body into that abandoned doorway of his apartment. Another shot of Brandon Lee is featured when he punches the mirror and it breaks. Like you see a reflection of Eric Draven, and I believe they used they used an unused footage of one of Brandon Lee's takes to use as a reaction for the broken mirror. And to those who are wondering about the broken mirror symbolizes bad luck, a violation of the soul, or a parable of carelessness. And that fits the scene very well because what the gang members did to not only Shelly but Eric Draven, it represents a violation of not only the soul but also showing bad luck for Eric Draven, knowing the fact that Eric's wife is dead. Eric's fiance is dead. Like she is no more, and he is so upset to the point that he breaks the mirror, showing the bad luck inside of him. And now this leads into his transformation into the Crow, and this leads into another shot after he puts on the costume, his rock and roll outfit. It's just basically a long black sleeve shirt, the face paint that he wears, and the final shot features the Crow itself, but also Eric Draven standing mid-frame in the middle of the shot, and the lightning effect strikes down and reveals the face of Eric Draven as the Crow. And what's awesome about that is that his face is all CGI. This is a CGI imposed face. That is not Brandon Lee. That is a CGI imposed face of Brandon Lee, and Chad Stahelski was the stand-in for Brandon Lee in this very scene. And the final shot of that scene is the camera zooming out of the apartment window while showing Eric Draven, but also seeing the broken apartment and the rain pouring down as Eric Draven about to set off on his mission for revenge. That alone was pure filmmaking. Knowing the fact of what went down behind the scenes, that scene was put together so well for what the filmmakers had. Now, this will lead into the accident itself. I'm going to go off topic from this movie and talk about the accident. Now, on March 31st, 1993, at Screen Gem Studios in Wilmington, North Carolina, Lee was filming a scene where his character Eric is shot after witnessing the beating and sexual assault of his fiancée Shelly. Actor Michael Massey's character Funboy fires a .44 Magnum Smith & Wesson Model 629 revolver at Lee as he walks into the room. A scene filmed 2 weeks before Lee's had called for the same gun to be shown in close-up. Revolvers often use dummy cartridges fitted with bullets, but no powder or primer during close-ups as they look more realistic than blank rounds, which have no bullet. Instead of purchasing commercial dummy cartridges, the film's prop crew, hampered by time and money constraints, created their own by pulling the bullets from live rounds, dumping the power charge but not the primer, then reinserting the bullets. Witnesses reported that 2 weeks before Lee's death, they saw an unsupervised actor pulling the trigger on the gun while it was loaded with the powderless but primed round. Having not removed the primer could detonate with enough energy to launch a bullet and lodge it in the barrel. In the fatal scene, which called for the revolver to be actually fired at Lee from a distance of 12 to 15 feet, the dummy cartridges were exchanged for blank rounds, which featured a live powder charge and primer but no bullet, thus allowing the gun to be fired without the risk of an actual projectile. As the production company has sent the firearms specialist home early, responsibility for the guns was given to a prop assistant who was unaware of the rule for inspecting all firearms before and after any handling. Therefore, the barrel was not checked for obstructions when the time came to load it with the blanks, and since the bullet from the dummy round was already trapped in the barrel, a condition known as a squib load, this caused the .44 Magnum bullet to be fired out of the barrel with virtually the same force as if the gun had been loaded with a live round, and it struck Lee in the abdomen, mortally wounding him. So that's the actual event that took place. So, for what I just read, it seems as though there were decisions left and right from the production company. Now, this was at Screen Gem Studios. This was Screen Gem Studios. This was at, but what went down? There were stupid decisions left and right on how to do this scene, and beyond that, the fact that the production company sent the firearms specialist home early is a big red flag, because firearms specialists, or armorers, I should say, are responsible for checking the firearm safety. So I'm not a gun expert on this, but for what I just read, it's a big red flag. Firearms specialists or armorers take this job seriously, and whoever made that decision to send the firearms specialist home early made a big mistake. And knowing the fact that someone gave the prop assistant the gun, unaware of the rule for inspecting all firearms before and after any handling, is also a big red flag too. Because why would you give a prop assistant the gun, and not telling that assistant that, oh, here's a gun, go do with it, and not telling him that, oh wait a minute, you need to check it first. Like, why would they do? Like, isn't that the armorer's responsibility to do that? Like, why would the production company do that to the firearms specialist? Like, that was a stupid decision. And if that didn't happen, Brandon Lee's death could have been prevented. Like, Brandon Lee's death could have been prevented if this decision did not happen. And it's so sad. It's really, really sad. And it's not the only time this will also happen. Almost 30 years later, back in 2021, Alec Baldwin had a similar situation. At that time, this was on a movie called Rust. And on the Rust movie set, there was an armorer, but unfortunately the armorer did not do her job, and Alec Baldwin who was holding a gun. Now this gun was a .45 Colt revolver, and of course the armorer was Hannah Gutierrez Reed, and she was the armorer for this movie, and she was not doing her job properly. And of course, this happened during a rehearsal take for Rust, where Alec Baldwin shot cinematographer Helena Hutchins, and this was taking place inside of a church at the Bonanza Creek Ranch. This whole situation went to trial, where Gutierrez was convicted, while Alec Baldwin was acquitted. Now, this is going off topic, I realize that, but this is a similar situation, and I believe Alec Baldwin's deserves Alec Baldwin's Rust deserves another episode. But I'm just saying that because this was like a similar accident that happened. Now, back to the Crow. This whole incident happened because of stupid decisions. And like I said, this whole thing could have been prevented if the studio didn't send the firearms specialist home early. This whole death could have been prevented. So as a result of that, the producers were faced with the decision of whether or not to continue with the film, and Brandon Lee almost completed most of his scenes for the film and was scheduled to shoot for only 3 more days. The rest of the cast and crew, except for Ernie Hudson, stayed in Wilmington, and Paramount Pictures were interested in distributing The Crow theatrically, originally a direct-to-video feature, opted out of involvement due to delays in filming and some controversy over the violent content being inappropriate given, and of course given the Brandon Lee's death. It wasn't until Miramax Films picked it up with the intention of releasing it in theaters and injected a further $8 million to complete the production, taking its budget to approximately $23 million. So the original budget was originally $15 million, but since Miramax came in, they added in $8 million, so the budget went up a bit. The cast and crew then took a break for script rewrites of the flashback scenes that had yet to be completed. And then, of course, as I mentioned, Chad Stahelski was Lee's stunt double, and it was used as a stand-in, and digital face replacement was used to superimpose Lee's face onto the head of the double. And, of course, the beginning of the movie, which had not been finished, was rewritten, and the apartment scene, which I actually mentioned, the apartment scene was remade using computer graphics from an earlier scene of Lee. And that's basically what happened behind the scenes. And rest in peace to Brandon Lee. Like, for what I heard, Brandon Lee did a fantastic job on this movie. He did a real good job playing the Crow on this movie. And it's a shame that he left. It's a real shame that he left, that he was gone too soon. So, rest in peace to Brandon Lee. But anyway, back to the movie. The first person Eric Draven locates is Tintin, being played by Lawrence Madsen. He's a thug obsessed with knives, and Eric engages in hand-to-hand combat. He wins the fight by catching a knife and pinning Tintin to the wall with it. And I like this little quote that he says to the guy after he pins him to the wall. He says, "Victims, aren't we all?" I mean, he really says that to him, knowing the fact that Eric Draven is more of a victim than this other guy. Like this other guy who was a part of this group, was one of the members who not only killed Shelley but also Eric Draven as well. And he confronts him about the murders in the previous year, and Tintin laughs in his face. And Eric was like, "Listen, I'm sure you remember about the murders that happened that previous year, especially with this girl Shelley." And this guy was like, "Yeah, what? Yeah. Who the hell cares? Some night, some Halloween night, some bitch. You know what I'm talking. You know." And Eric Draven doesn't give a crap. Like, he finishes the guy off by stabbing him in each vital organ in alphabetical order with his own knives, and takes his trench coat. And of course, the Crow also leaves a crow-shaped blood stain on the wall of the alley. And using Tintin's memories, he goes to the pawn shop where Tintin sold Shelley's engagement ring, where Eric forces the owner, Gideon, being played by John Polito, to show him where the ring is located, and finds it mixed in a box with dozens of other rings. He lets Gideon live so that he can deliver a message of death to the rest of the gang before he douses the counters in gasoline, loads a shotgun with other rings of destroyed lives, and fires, igniting the shop in a massive explosion, while Gideon escapes alive but badly burned. Dude, I'm telling you right now, the Crow does not play games. Like, this is a guy out for revenge. This guy is out for revenge. on those who not only murdered Shelly but also ruined the night before their wedding too. Like, I mean, okay, yeah, as weird as it sounds, knowing the fact that they're going to get married on Halloween night, you gotta admit the fact that what he's doing, you know what Eric Draven is doing. Like, he's going after those who ruined the most important night of their life. That was going to happen, but no, that did not happen. He's not playing around, and he goes on a rampage for revenge, taking out those who ruined his life. Eric Draven lost so much. His life, his career, his future wife as well. I mean, you feel for this guy. So anyway, Eric locates the next thug on his list. His name is Funboy, and Funboy is being played by Michael Massey. And going off topic again, Michael Massey was the one who fired the gun, but he was unaware of the bullet that was inside. So I mean, he was unaware of it, and I feel bad from Michael Massey because Michael Massey didn't know about this gun. Like I said, there were a lot of stupid decisions on set, and if the production company didn't send the firearms master home early, none of this would have happened. And Michael Massey was living with this guilt, and he was so guilty. He actually took a break from acting for the next year, and he went on an interview, and I think it was, I don't know what show it was, but he did a live interview where he was talking about this movie and realizing how tragic this whole incident was, and he was carrying this guilt. And I feel bad for Michael Massey. He didn't mean to kill Brandon Lee, and he didn't know about this gun. He didn't know about the gun nor bullet. I feel so bad for him, and I know he went on to do other projects in the later years. So at the very least, he was able to move on with his career. But at the end of the day, it wasn't Michael Massey's fault. It was more on the decisions from the production company who sent the firearms specialist home, and among a few other things. But anyway, going back to the scene. Now, Funboy is getting high in an apartment with Sarah's drug-addicted mother, Darla, being played by Anna Thompson, and Funboy shoots Eric in the hand, and Eric mocks him by pretending to scream in pain before showing the hole in his palm, and his palm heals up before his very eyes. Frightened, Funboy is easily disarmed by Eric and is shot in the thigh before being injected with an overdose of morphine, while Eric confronts Darla but merely says that morphine is bad for her, forcing the drug out of her arm, seemingly by magic, and tells her that she should return to her daughter, who is surviving alone on the streets. So the daughter is Sarah. Sarah's the daughter in this movie, and Darla's the mom. And Darla has been hanging out with the wrong people at this very point. So I'm glad Eric was able to do some good here. He was able to rescue Darla from that drug overdose of morphine. Like, he was able to take the morphine out of Darla's body, well, obviously with magic, and tells her that, listen, you have more important things than this. Your daughter needs you. Go to your daughter and help her. Like, that's what Eric Draven is trying to say. I mean, something like that, but it was something else too. But I'm glad Eric was able to do some good here and help Darla out. So anyway, later on, Albrecht, meanwhile, has been following the deaths of the thugs around town, and Albrecht, as I mentioned, is being played by Ernie Hudson, and he doesn't share the rest of the department's views on the killings, thinking of them as more of a blessing than a curse. He even goes so far as to rescue Eric as he flees from choppers after his latest killing, though Eric is quick to disappear afterwards. Upon meeting again later on, Eric explains what he's doing and offers his best reason to why he's come back. Albrecht tells him that what he knows of Shelley's death and reveals that he stayed with her as she suffered through 30 hours of agony before dying. Eric touches Albrecht and receives from him all the pain felt by Shelley during that time. And this was also at his apartment too. Like, we even get a little funny scene where Eric Draven gives Ernie Hudson's character a bottle of beer, and Ernie Hudson was like, "Are you some kind of a ghost?" Eric Draven was like, "Boo." I gotta laugh out of that. I thought that was pretty funny. But at the same time, the conversation they do have is very heartwarming too. Knowing the fact that Eric is back, and of course, discuss the pain that he's going through, especially after coming back from the dead. But moving forward, Gideon goes to the main villain. His name is Top Dollar, and he's being played by Michael Wincott, the leader of all gangs in Detroit, and warns him about Eric. Top Dollar responds by stabbing Gideon through the frickin' throat with a sword, sinking it to the hilt as his lover, half-sister, Soothsayer, Micah, being played by Bai Ling, who looks on with glee. What the hell is going on here? And around that time, two of Top Dollar's thugs, T-Bird and Skank, yes, those are their names, T-Bird and Skank, they're being played by David Patrick Kelly and Angel David. They stop by with the news about Tintin's murder, and Top Dollar shows only virtually no concern for Tintin's demise and snorts cocaine for a large pile. Boy, Top Dollar is really going all out on this cocaine. Like, literally, this is scary shit right there. You realize how scary this shit is? Knowing the fact that Top Dollar is behind all this, sending his men to do these heinous acts, and of course, knowing the fact that those were the guys who killed Eric Draven and Shelley. T-Bird and Skank stop at a convenience store for supplies, while Eric sneaks into T-Bird's classic Ford Thunderbird and kidnaps him while Skank is in the store. Eric forces T-Bird to drive at high speed through the streets. Skank runs into the street, gets hit by a car, and steals it to follow the pair. He watches as Eric ties T-Bird to the driver's seat of a car with explosives strapped to him and lets the car drive off the pier, where it explodes mid-air and sinks into the harbor. When the police arrive, they discover a fiery symbol in the shape of a crow at the scene. Yet another good scene. The scene where Eric Draven lights up a crow symbol, symbolizes that the crow is here. Like, there's no turning back. This guy is here, the crow is here, and he is out for vengeance. Much like Batman in his Batman signal, the crow has got his very own signal, and that is the fiery logo of the crow. Meanwhile, Darla tries to reconcile with Sarah by making her breakfast. Though Sarah is skeptical at first of her mother's sudden change of heart, she accepts the effort and hugs her. And that was another moment that I actually liked, because Sarah and her mom, like Sarah's mom has been hanging out with the wrong people, and of course, with the help of the crow was able to help Sarah's mom, Darla, and of course have a change of heart. So Darla is trying to start fresh, making breakfast for her own daughter, and even though Sarah is skeptical about it, she soon accepts it and hugs her. And I think that was a very heartwarming moment too, because it seems as though Darla is trying to go on trying to have a change of heart, try to be a different person, because the person that she was hanging out with the wrong people, was on drugs, and of course many other things. But at the same time, thanks to Eric Draven was able to help her. And of course, Eric Draven's like, listen, you have a daughter to take care of. You need to do better. And I just hope you, and I hope you take, and I hope took the morphine out of you with magic. So now you're free. Go help your daughter. And that's what Eric Draven was doing before that very scene with Sarah and her mom, Darla. So anyway, Albrecht's superior chews him out, and just because he can, and tells him he's suspended for misconduct. So later on, Sarah goes to Eric's apartment and speaks out to the shadows, feeling that he must be nearby. And she's referring to Eric. She tells him that she misses him and Shelley, but when no one responds, goes to leave and says that she figured out why he wouldn't care anymore. Eric speaks to her, appearing in the window, and tells her that although they cannot be friends anymore, he still cares about her. Eric doesn't even care anymore because this is a guy who. This is Eric, the Crow. This is a guy who was beaten to death, tossed out of a window, lost his life, his wife, his music career, everything. Brought back and goes out for vengeance. This is a guy who doesn't care anymore. But at the same time, but also at the same time, even though he doesn't care anymore, he still shows that he has a bit of heart inside him, especially with Sarah. Like, Sarah helps him out throughout the process of this movie a little bit in that very scene. Even Shelley herself, even though she was not in this movie for very long, but the love for Shelley the love for Shelley and his quest for revenge is what drives the narrative of this movie, and for Eric Draven himself. And that really says it all, because Eric really loves Shelley, and with Shelley gone, Shelley's love was the one that drives this whole narrative for Eric Draven, and of course the quest for vengeance as well. So anyway, going back to one of the gang members, Skank retreats to the gang hideout, rambling wildly about Eric. Sarah and Albrecht bond over their mutual experiences with Eric and discuss how he came back. At the gang hideout, Top Dollar, hardly concerned for T-Bird's fate, is discussing plans for criminal activity on Devil's Night with his other criminal associates, and this takes place at this gothic conference room that Top Dollar and his men are at, and it's the atmosphere itself is very hellish too. Like, Top Dollar is a greedy bastard, and the leader of this entire organization, and with that being taking place on Devil's Night, oof, Top Dollar is in for a hell of a night. But anyway, Eric comes in and crashes the meeting looking for Skank, and proceeds to mock everyone in the room. Like, I like this bit of dialogue that Top Dollar says. He's like, "Well, there he is, the Avenger, the killer of killers." Like, he says that in front of Eric Draven while he casually goes over the table and sits on the table in crisscross applesauce, and while he's crisscross applesauce, basically crossing his legs, while sitting on top of the table, like crisscross applesauce. I get that from elementary school. The whole crisscross applesauce when you're sitting in front of the teacher when you're sitting in front of the teacher as a little kid. You get it. But anyway, Top Dollar orders him. Top Dollar is ready to kill this bastard, and when I mean by bastard, I'm talking about the Crow himself and his associates all open fire, forcing Eric off the large conference table. He rises after a few moments, and a massive gunfight ensues. Top Dollar escapes with Micah and his lieutenant Grange, being played by Tony Todd, and Eric kills everyone in the room by gun, fists, and swords, saving Skank for last, throwing him out of the window, with the police arriving on the scene to find Eric the last man standing, and he escapes with Albrecht's help. Top Dollar, Grange, and Micah discuss Eric and his unique abilities, and Micah reveals that Eric is invulnerable to harm, but only if his link to the real world, the Crow, remains untouched. Realizing that if they kill the Crow, they can kill Eric, and the three of them hatch a plan. Oh boy. Having killed the last of the four who had murdered him and Shelley, Eric returns to the cemetery and visits Shelley's grave. And while Sarah meets him there to say goodbye and he gives her Shelley's engagement ring as a necklace, Sarah leaves the cemetery only to be abducted by Grange and taken to a local church where Top Dollar and Micah are hiding out. Through the Crow, Eric sees that Sarah's in danger and goes to rescue her. The Crow flies inside ahead of him but is sniped by Grange. Eric, not realizing what wounding the Crow has done for his own invulnerability, accosts Top Dollar, saying he'll let him live if he gives Sarah to Eric. Top Dollar shoots Eric, now no longer invisible, and beats him. Sarah is taken to the upper levels of the church. Albrecht, having gone to the church to pay his respects, realizes what's happening and comes in shooting. He finds Eric on the floor and helps him towards the spiral staircase in the back. The wounded Crow is picked up by Micah, who hopes to harness its mystical powers. And Albrecht manages to shoot and kill Grange, but is wounded himself. He stays below as Eric ascends the stairs. Now you're all probably wondering what's gonna happen to the actual Crow, the bird itself, in the hands of Micah. What's gonna happen? Like, does Micah kill this bird? Nope. It turns out while she was holding the Crow at knife point, the Crow lunges up and pecks her eyes out. She is blind to the point. This leads to her death, falling down from the top of the church to the very ground from the stairs. This is like Tim Burton's Batman, except no eyes were pecked out. It's basically Batman, taking down this one tough guy from the top of the cathedral, and he takes him down with his legs, basically Batman hanging upside down. He takes him down after getting hit in the head by this giant church bell, and this giant thug gets dragged down by Batman's legs all the way down to the bottom floor. That's what it feels like in the scene, except the only difference is it's the bird itself that pecks out Micah's eyes, and she falls to her death from the top of the stairs of the church. That is a brutal death scene right there. So later on, Eric makes it to the roof where Top Dollar is holding Sarah. He pushes her off the roof she manages to hold onto some scaffolding as Top Dollar and Eric fight. Distracted for a moment by Sarah's cries for help, Eric and Top Dollar engage in a sword-like duel on top of the church, and it's raining outside too. And by the way, it's a pretty cool fight too. It's a cool fight as well outside on top of that church, and it does call back to a little bit of Tim Burton's Batman a little bit, but the only difference is this is basically the Crow and Top Dollar fighting on top of the roof of the church. And while the fight is good, it seems as though Eric Draven has the upper hand. Top Dollar, a huge upper hand, because he stabs Eric through the back by Top Dollar, who admits to having everything to do with Eric and Shelley's deaths, claiming that nothing goes on in their town without his say-so. He tells Eric that he's enjoyed their sparring and that he'll miss him, but before he can kill him, Eric grabs him and bestows his gratitude for Top Dollar's crimes. And this is like a gift that Eric gives to Top Dollar. And what was that gift for all of Top Dollar's crimes? All of the 30 hours of pain Shelley had to endure at once. I'm not kidding. That's what Eric Draven gave Top Dollar. All of the 30 hours of pain that Shelley had to endure at once, with all the crime and all the violence and all the drugs and the greed that Top Dollar has, he is defeated by agonizing pain of the 30 hours of Shelly's pain. That's like the ultimate defeat right there. And Top Dollar falls off the roof and is impaled on a gargoyle and blood spilling out of it. That alone is a satisfying death. Like one of the most satisfying villain deaths out there. Like this guy, Top Dollar, this villain deserved that death that he got. He caused a lot of pain and suffering for the city of Detroit, but also Eric. Like Top Dollar has done enough damage. Like he did a lot of damage to other people, including Eric and Shelly. And that death that Top Dollar got was deserving. Like he deserved that death from Eric Draven. Like Top Dollar really crossed the line when it comes to Eric and Shelly's night before the wedding. And Eric Draven was like, "Hey, screw you, Top Dollar." Like that's like Eric. This is basically Eric giving Top Dollar a screw you gift. And boy, that was a satisfying death right there, and brutal one too. So that's the end of Top Dollar right there. So after the whole fight, Eric rescues Sarah and brings her to Albrecht, who is soon taken to an ambulance. Eric then disappears from sight and crawls to Shelly's grave. Before passing out, her spirit comes to him, sans face paint, and they are finally reunited. Later, Sarah visits Eric's grave, which has closed up once again. The crow stands on his headstone, holding Shelly's ring that Sarah lost during her abduction. The crow drops it in Sarah's hand, and the crow flies away. And as the crow flies off into the night, Sarah narrates that though buildings burn and people die, real love is forever. And that is a very good quote right there. Even though buildings burn and people die, real love is forever. Like, this represents not only Eric Draven, but also Brandon Lee too, because both of these guys show real love. They show real love. Like, Eric Draven had real love for Shelly up until her death, and of course his death too. But even Brandon Lee himself, Brandon Lee, like this was Brandon Lee's role. Like he showed love and passion for his role of the Crow. Even his friends and family said that prior to his death, that Brandon Lee showed so much love and passion for the role, and it'd be insane if they canceled that movie. So I'm glad that with the help of Brandon Lee's family and friends, the filmmakers were able to get the film finished, and the film closes with the words for Brandon and Eliza, a dedication to both Brandon Lee, who was accidentally killed during the filming in 1993, and Eliza Hutton, who was Brandon's partner until his death in 1993. So, in case you all are probably wondering, Eliza Hutton was also Brandon Lee's fiance. Brandon Lee was going to marry Eliza Hutton, who was actually director Rennie Harlan's personal assistant, and both Hutton and Lee were going to get married in April after filming was done, but unfortunately that did not happen. Like, Eliza Hutton is still alive. She's still alive, but of course Eliza Hutton continues to work in the Hollywood film industry. But the fact that the dedication was added for both Brandon Lee and Eliza Hutton really shows. It really shows that both Eliza Hutton and Brandon Lee, they both have love for each other, and they were going to get married, and that was going to happen. And like I said, if the decision making of the studio sending home that specialist home early, this death could have been prevented, and Brandon Lee and Eliza Hutton would have been married, and of course Brandon Lee would have gone on to do more movie roles. But unfortunately, that has never happened. But I'm really glad that the ending of this movie has a good dedication to Brandon Lee. And that's it. That's basically The Crow. That is it. That is it. That is my breakdown of The Crow. Now, to me, when I saw this movie, I enjoyed the film very much. Like the action sequences, the acting is all good. But the real thing is basically Brandon Lee's presence. His presence is felt throughout this entire movie. And with the gothic setting and the production design to the visual effects, it's all good. Like the quest for vengeance in this movie is very good too. Like the way how it was written was good. Even though there was a lot of rewrites due to the death of Brandon Lee, it still works. And I'm surprised and glad that this film got made. Because if this film never got a release, if this film was never released, nobody would have known. Nobody would have known about this movie. Because this movie would not exist if the filmmakers canceled this movie. Thank goodness this film existed. Many people are going to remember this movie because of Brandon Lee. That's how people are going to remember this movie. Now, to be fair, yes, there were sequels and a reboot. Those projects don't hold a candle to what the original had, because the original had heart and passion to it, especially from Brandon Lee. Alex Proyas did a fantastic job getting this film off the ground, despite the troubled production that this film was going through. This film is obviously a good film to watch. And that is basically it. That is basically it. That is the end of this episode. And to those who are listening, I hope you enjoy this episode. And let me ask you this: what did you think of The Crow? Have you seen this movie? Have you not seen this movie? Did you think this movie holds up to this day? I would love to hear your thoughts. But anyway, that's all I have for this episode. And rest in peace to Brandon Lee. So anyway, that is a wrap on this episode. Thank you all for tuning in to Codo Cinema. I'm your host, Mark Codo, aka Codoman. Remember to watch movies, stay positive, and good night. Until next week.